I don't think we've ever done that before, but we're going to do it today because today's sin of the 7 deadly sins is gluttony. Now, I have to say, gluttony is one of the less sort of compelling sins at first glance. And I was not enthusiastic about gluttony, as I am about some of the other sins, which I'm very enthusiastic about. But the more I thought and read about gluttony, the more I realized how much it actually encompasses in the question of sinfulness. And so I am going to encourage you to come with me on this gluttonous journey through the sinfulness of gluttony. And I'm going to begin by talking about the fact that some of the aspects of gluttony are no longer as relevant to us as they were to the ancients. So sorry, must have eaten something bad. So the aesthetic idea the ascetic, not aesthetic, but ascetic idea, that is that you should be self-depriving, that there is something inherently wrong with pleasure, that if you eat something that tastes good, that's not good, which did have some sway in classical and medieval times. That's not something that has much resonance today. We still call things, you notice, sinfully delicious, but that is a vestige of this idea that to enjoy something is inherently bad. And I think that most of us, certainly at the end of a year-long pandemic, don't think that enjoying things is inherently a bad thing, but probably that we haven't enjoyed enough over the past year. So I'm going to put that aside and not actually so much deal with that question, although you should know that lingers somehow. You know, it's like H.L. Mencken's definition of a Puritan, which is the lingering suspicion that someone somewhere is enjoying themselves. And that is not what we would object to about eating. Nonetheless, there are at least 3 or 4 aspects of the sin of gluttony that I think actually require serious and sustained thought in a moral sense. And I'll give you one. I'll give you all 4, but I'll give you one to start off with. And that is the notion that there is a sinful as well as a distasteful amount of abundance in some of our celebrations and in some of our lives. Sometimes I will walk into a wedding or to a bar mitzvah, and I will see that the amount of food is almost obscene, and have a sense that it's a show of extravagance that is intended not to feed people, but to demonstrate the wealth of whoever it is that's putting on the celebration. And that is a gluttonous display, if not the actual gluttony of eating, that I think is worth considering, because extravagance of that kind is not only distasteful because of what it says about the person who does it, but also because of the time and effort and labor that goes into making food that will not be consumed in the end, because a lot of it will not be consumed, a lot of it will be wasted. And also when you think about the fact that there are so many who don't have that kind of food. And there is something about wild imbalances that are emphasized and made a cause of display that strikes us as not just aesthetically, but morally unsavory. So, and unsavory is a perfect word to use, I think, when you're talking about gluttony. It's unsavory. It doesn't taste good. It's in poor taste to have that much food on display in a world in which there is hunger and when so much of that food will be wasted. That's one. The second, which is a serious problem in America, as we all know, is the health implications of gluttony. The primary comorbidity for COVID was obesity, is obesity. And obesity, which granted can be due to many factors, but one of the factors is both the eating habits and the mass production of food and the abundance of food that America is constantly pushing on itself, and the kind of food that it's pushing on itself. And so eating to the point where you literally will make yourself sick with clogged arteries and diabetes and other things, it is difficult to make a moral distinction between that and smoking or any other way of making yourself sick. And since all of us have responsibilities to others as well as to ourselves, that is, to our children, to our family, to those people who rely on us for work, for friendship, for whatever, I think that it is fair to say that while that doesn't mean that you have to spend all day and all night in the gym, you are not obligated to be at the peak of health all the time. There are other considerations in life that can supervene. To say that it is a moral question if you are damaging your health by the amount that you eat is to say something that is very ethically defensible. So there is that as well. And we know, at least in part, that this is not just a biological question, because the average weight of Americans has skyrocketed so much. And as you travel around the world, you see that, in fact, obesity is more of a problem in America than in almost any other place. Than in any other place that I've ever traveled. And I've traveled to a lot of countries. And that's not because Americans are genetically obese. It's because of the food, both choices and advertising and availability that America has and is, to some extent, unfortunately, spreading around the world. So it is abundance, it's health. The other, now here is a more interesting question, and it's become certainly more of a question lately. Never in human history, I think it is fair to say, has there been as much emphasis on food as there is now. When I was growing up, no one called themselves a foodie, which made as much sense as calling yourself a drinky or an airy, right? We all breathed, we all drank water, we all ate food. And so to call yourself a foodie just meant you ate food like everybody else. But now it means you have this highly refined palate. And the question is, how much time, attention, care, devotion does food deserve in a balanced life? And here there is certainly room for debate. But I think from a Jewish religious point of view, the primary question about food, which we're going to get to next, is not whether it is prepared in accordance with the master chef on one of the cooking channels, but whether it is kosher and how much the animal suffered, which is another question about food. That is clearly an ethical question about food, is the fact that billions of chickens, as well as I don't know how many millions or billions of cows and pigs and so on, are raised, confined, slaughtered, often living truly terrible lives in order to satisfy our appetites. There are many documentaries on this and many books on this, and we don't have to belabor it. But trust me when I tell you that those of you who eat meat, the meat that you eat, if you watched how it lived, it would be disturbing to your ethical sensibility. They're not, they're not free range. Does not mean that they live like the Von Trapp family, singing in the Alps until someone comes along and then painlessly slaughters them and brings them to your kitchen table. So there is a question of suffering and of animal suffering and of just pain, the amount of pain and the quantity of pain in the world that is raised by the question of what you eat. And then, of course, for Judaism, there is the additional level of kashrut. What does it mean to keep kosher? And why is kashrut an ethical imperative in the Jewish tradition? And there are lots of reasons why keeping kosher matters in Judaism. The two principal, or the three principal ones, are one that I explained before, that kosher slaughter is supposed to be a painless method of slaughter. Two is that it reminds you of your connection to other Jews and to Judaism in the world. And three is that it reminds you of your connection to God. All of it through food. And people who keep kosher, it reminds you that you really can have culinary discipline. Because years ago, Rabbi Joseph Telushkin pointed out that people who know that they're killing themselves by the amount that they eat, that they're overweight and it's terrible for their health and they can't stop eating, if they're religious Jews, they still wouldn't eat anything that is non-kosher, because the religious stricture is more powerful to them even than their own health strictures, which is a fascinating thing. That's why some rabbis have declared that to smoke cigarettes against Jewish law, because they knew that if they said that, some people who couldn't quit otherwise would quit because they wouldn't violate the rabbi's legal Jewish edict, halachic edict. And the same thing is true here, which is how much of a regulation on appetite is required when it comes to something like food in order to consider yourself an ethical human being. And then I'll mention two other issues about gluttony that are relevant. One, which is raised in traditional sources, but is less of an issue for most of us, I think, than other things, is that it can lead to other sins. Eating too much can lead to drinking too much, or it can lead to underhanded ways of getting money so that you can spend that money on food if you're really obsessed with food, or to stealing food. In other words, every appetite has the potential to lead to other activities to feed that appetite that are not salutary, that are not good. More compelling, I think, although I'm happy to hear your thoughts on it as we move along, more compelling is the environmental effect of the way we eat. Because in a world in which we know that we have a profound effect on our environment, raising billions of cattle, meat eating, and so on, has a real environmental impact, and almost nobody who doesn't exactly have skin in the game, like say the meat industry, denies the enormous environmental implications of the way that humanity consumes its protein. Now, one interesting ethical wrinkle is that, now they're raising sort of meatless meat. And I'm not talking about soy proteins or other things. I mean, they use a cell from a cow or another animal, and they make meat from that cell, which doesn't require slaughtering anything. It's lab-grown meat. Questions of kashrut and questions of vegetarianism become really interesting and complicated when you raise those issues of lab-grown meat. And I honestly have not given it much thought or read much about it, and I'm not prepared to say anything either way. as somebody who hasn't had chicken or meat in over 30 years, 25 years in one case, 30 years in another. So it's been a very long time. It would be very hard for me to put a piece of chicken or meat in my mouth, even if I knew that it actually wasn't an animal that it came from. But I don't know, you get used to a lot of things and unused to a lot of things. So who knows? As I said, I am certainly not prepared either way to make a pronouncement on that. Now, if you have questions or comments on any of the things that we have raised so far, I certainly invite you to ask them, and also let's see, we have some. Okay, so yes, there is a difference. I grant you, Marla, about difference, say, between alcohol and cigarettes and food. That you need food to live. That's why it makes it so much harder and sometimes to lose weight than it is to quit cigarettes. Because if you never smoke another cigarette, you never have to smoke another cigarette. You can never not eat another thing. That's also what makes it a more interesting ethical question, in a way, because all the really interesting ethical questions aren't, do I do this or never do it? It's how much do I do this or how much do I not do it? It's like kind speech or unkind speech. Well, if you never spoke again, the problem is solved. The problem is you've still got to talk. And since you still got to talk and you inevitably have to talk about other people, what can you say? What can you not say? So since, yes, you have to eat, and that means you will always be tempted to eat more because, as the French say, the appetite grows with eating. The question is, how do you regulate an appetite once you've started to eat? And that's a really, I mean, it's a tough and multi-layered question, and I'm not sure how. Also, by the way, there's another aspect to this, since someone said something about their mother, which is that there's traditionally a lot of guilt and shame around eating and different ways of eating. It's a psychological, it's true of all sins, I suppose, but it's a psychological as well as a spiritual issue. You must clean your plate because there are children starving in Africa routine, which is a way of training people to overeat from the time they're very young. Because if they don't want any more and you tell them, but you have to, because it's an ethical imperative to finish the food on your plate, it then becomes an ethical violation to stop when you're no longer hungry. And so that makes gluttony a somewhat different question from other questions. Although I think if you look at the sins, it's interesting to think about this. Are there any of them that you can just never, ever do? Can you never have envy, never have pride, never have anger, never have lust, never have gluttony, never have greed, never have sloth? I don't think so. Although you could argue that there are some that every time you partake in them, it's bad. You could, although I can't imagine, it depends. Is it bad every time you partake in anger or envy? I don't know. No, not so easy. All of them have elements of gluttony too, which means that they are sins that are impossible to entirely eliminate from one's catalog of behaviors. So so since I don't see any other question at the moment, I'll say also this, which is that the takeaway in some sense from gluttony is that all of moral life is about balance. And it is impossible to lead a life of decency without taking into account a variety of factors, and that those people who try to be too absolute in almost any direction inevitably overstep the moral equation. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't moments and issues for absolutism. There are, but Maimonides, following Aristotle, counseling the golden mean, certainly in something like food, is wise counsel. It's difficult to thread in almost every area of life. I was going to say that I just completed a review of a book that will probably be out in the next few days. The book came out today, which is Jordan Peterson's new book. It's called Beyond Order. It's 12 More Rules for Living. And that was, without talking about the book right now, that was the subject of the review. It's the question of absolutism and the question of what is balance. In some place, I like to give you the short review. In some place, I like this balance. Some place, I did not at all. But that is the question everybody who thinks about moral questions has to contend with. As I've said before, my brother, who is an ethicist at Emory University, says moral questions are almost never about what's right and what's wrong. They're always about competing rights. That is, do you do this or do you do that? And there are arguments on both sides, and then you have to decide which is righter and which is wronger. And so here too, celebration is good, absurd abundance not good. But what's the sweet spot in the middle? And the sweet spot in one place is not going to be the same as another. And so you have this enduring question that is not an easy one. Not an easy one. Okay, it's your turn now. I've talked enough about food. Now ask a question or make a comment or suggest a recipe. Children tossing school and lunch in trash. Who's the best chef in your household? I don't think we really have a chef in my household. So I'm not sure that anybody in my household could be designated with as exalted a term as chef. Yeah, kids do. I mean, the questions of school lunches have been a serious question, as you know, over the years. What kids can bring to school, what they can't bring to school, what they do eat, what they don't eat, and all the associated pathologies of eating, which is something we didn't mention, although I had meant to. Anorexia, bulimia, body morphic disorders. Because part of this sort of flip side of gluttony is the portrayal of the human body in completely unrealistic terms. That every, TikTok and Instagram, and it used to just be television and movies, but now it's television, movies, billboards, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. It's not so much Twitter, I guess, but everybody who displays themselves as this sort of perfect, unimaginable in real life paragon of physicality that surely promotes eating habits and self-image that is distorted and unhealthy. And so this arises from lots of different social factors, but primarily from the need to get attention and sell things. And therefore, gluttony is implied in a certain way in the hierarchy of our economic system and the way in which it works and doesn't work, and the kinds of images that it produces, so that people will think badly about themselves and think that if they only purchase that which is on display in some photoshopped body, that they will be, that they will be the same as the picture on the Instagram, which even the person in the Instagram is not the same as the picture on the Instagram. Nonetheless, this is also an issue, and is one of the ways in which the society upends itself in a way by being dishonest about its own pathologies. And certainly those of you who have or know teenagers, especially teenage girls, but that is just the sort of the tip of the spear. It is true for almost everyone, but especially teenage girls know that this is literally a danger to their health and as well as to their psychological well-being. This insistence on presenting the world as though the images you see are the way people are supposed to look. And we know that's not true. That is just not true. Okay, what else you got? What else you got? Let's see. I don't see anything else on there. Nope, I do not see any on there. If you don't ask me questions, it's going to be very, very hard. I'm going to have to, I have concluded my soliloquy, so now it's your turn. It's lunch and learn and comment, and you're not commenting. I'm looking. Nope, nothing. All my screens say you have not produced more questions or comments. Let's see. Oh. Thank you is a nice thing, but doesn't require that much of a response. So I will give you then a preview of what is upcoming. We have two more classes in the 7, which are greed and sloth. Sloth, of course, is the class you're allowed to you can oversleep and miss that one. But next time is greed. Also, let me just announce a couple of other classes. Every Thursday morning at 9 o'clock, right here, we do the Torah portion of the week. And 6 o'clock, if you are on Clubhouse, we do a different version of the Torah portion. And of course, Shabbat morning, I invite you to join us for services and sermon and other classes of the clergy. I hope you can find easily on our website at sinaitemple.org. Passover is coming up, remarkably enough, and that's God only knows what that's going to be like this year. We will see. It's been a year. However, I will say this: a year ago, nobody imagined that we would have such effective vaccines. So maybe there is cause for great optimism. Somebody asked, Shirley Ann asked, what's the best way to go vegetarian? Is it best to go cold turkey, which is a cute pun? I don't know. I stopped eating red meat because over 30 years ago, my doctor told me that I had high cholesterol. Then I got involved with my former wife who didn't eat chicken, so I stopped eating chicken. And that was it. I didn't find it all that onerous, to tell you the truth. And I've never particularly had a hankering to go back and eat it. But different people feel differently about it. And so I advise you to do it the best way for you. There was a period in my life where I smoked cigarettes, and I tried to quit in several different ways, and finally just did. So I wouldn't know how to tell you how to do that either. That was a long time ago, but still I found that more difficult actually than not eating meat. I don't know why. The mysterious alchemy of each person's chemistry and experience is different. So the only thing that I can say is that we know that the neural pathways take a certain amount of time, and I suppose for different habits it's a different amount of time, but they do change. They do change. So do whatever you need to do for a while to make it comfortable and easy for you to break a habit, as long as it doesn't involve creating an even worse habit. And in time, your body will get used to it. It's God leads you. God leads you in the direction that you want to go. That's what the Talmud says. So there you have it. I know we have questions on other topics, but I'm not going to do subjects apart from the class at the moment. That because that will take us afield and also requires another class. So I'm going to leave that aside, stick with food for the moment and sin. And next time, I hope you will join me for greed. Okay. Thank you very much, and stay safe, stay healthy, and eat well.